Good afternoon and welcome to our Scaleup Summit that is digitally hosted in Tel Aviv, Israel. As you might see, we have a quite dense and packed agenda for this afternoon. We will start with a welcome by the European Ambassador Emanuele Giaufret. He's the head of the delegation of the European Union to the State of Israel. Afterwards, we will have a very, very interesting fireside chat with as main guest Jean-Henri Paquet, that is Director General for Digital Research and Innovation of the European Commission, that will be interviewed by my partner in crime, Marco Marinucci. And after all, we will enter into the main agenda of our Scaleup Summit. We'll explain the structure of the summit that by the general overall circumstances has been turned into fully digital, has been turned into a full month of events and activities. We will have we will introduce the highlights of our new report that will be launched next week on Monday in occasion of the European Climate Forum organized by the European Delegation of the State of Israel. And after we will have, we'll give the floor to our corporate partners, and the scale has been selected for them. But without any further ado, I would like to give the stage to our European Ambassador, Emanuele Giaufret. Emanuele, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Alberto, for the introduction. Last year, I opened this meeting in a very different circumstances. We were all in Tel Aviv enjoying the good weather. This year we begin our meeting in a more somber note. We're still in the middle of a very serious health crisis and certainly experiencing an economic crisis as well. Nevertheless, I'm very pleased we're going ahead with this third edition of Startup Europe coming to Israel, which is a unique initiative implemented by Mind the Bridge and supported by the Commission and other partners. And it's important to bring European and Israeli startups, investors, and other stakeholders together from our respective ecosystems. The business dialogue initiated between the European Union and Israel stakeholders seems to be taking off and getting stronger. We can see the mutual relationship also in the way that the current crisis has impacted our respective and shared investment. I have to say that many Israeli startups are themselves facing a crisis right now in the fallout of the global pandemic. And I hope that this meeting will help them to get back on track, even in a small way. And it only underlies how connected we are already in Europe and in Israel. The EU is leading a recovery plan for Europe, and I'm sure that our recovery will also help here in Israel because our economy are so interconnected. It's worth mentioning as a backdrop to this event that the European economic presence in Israel has been growing rapidly for a number of years now. There is clearly a growing interest by European Union companies to tap into Israeli achievements in the field of innovation. And as you were saying, Alberto, this week we are actually in 2 days, on Thursday, we're hosting a unique and very high-level conference on the European Green Deal and how Israel can contribute to that through green technologies and innovations. So we'll have more than 1,000 participants from Israel and the EU attending, as well very high-level speakers, EU commissioners, Israeli ministers, and CEO of important companies. This is just an example of how EU and Israel agendas can fit well together in the areas of startup and innovation. Our agenda is focusing, of course, on health, because the pandemic is forcing us to put the focus on health, but also on climate change, digitizations, and many other opportunities around these key topics where Israeli innovation can play a role. And we know how important this cooperation between the EU and Israel is for our policies and also for our economies. We wish for it to continue in this direction. We think that with the priorities that the European Commission has set, there is so much room still for engagement, promising opportunities, and even more prosperous and enhanced cooperation across very many different sectors. There is a lot to gain from our cooperation, and therefore there's also a lot to lose. And there are some gray clouds hovering over us currently that could impact this relationship, and we all hope that they will not make any rain. As you know, Israel has been a very successful associated member of the European Union Framework Program for Research and Innovation, currently called Horizon 2020, which has been ongoing for 20 years. This program, which is the largest of its kind, and I'm sure that the Director General of DG Research and Innovation, Jean-Marie Paquet, will tell us more about that, is an important instrument for our bilateral cooperation. And has been involved also a number of startups and SMEs that have been able to transform their innovation into actual products to sell on the market, the Israeli and the European market. So the next phase of this program, which is called Horizon Europe, is just beginning its discussion now. Also, in this context, I should recall that the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, the EIT, has opened a hub in Tel Aviv last year. And the EIT is an autonomous agency of the European Commission, which has its main headquarters in Budapest, and as I said, has now opened a hub in Tel Aviv. Also, just to go through a quick tour d'horizon of the cooperation between Israel and the EU, I should mention that the European Investment Bank and its specialized branch, the European Investment Fund, has been increasingly active in Israel. During the heat of the Corona crisis, the EIB provided a grant to an Israeli-German company called Pluristem for 50 million euros to advance its COVID treatment research. So there's no shortage of Israeli companies that are scaling up in Europe. And this is coming on top of an already very close economic times and the impressive trade flows between Europe and Israel. The European Union is by far the Israeli largest economic partner, with about 34% of its exports and 40% of its imports. So we need to ensure that we keep moving in this direction, and Startup Europe comes to Israel is the right contribution to this growing positive evolution in the EU-Israeli relations. So I would like to thank Mind the Bridge for their work, constant work, third edition already. Congratulations, thank you. I also would like to thank the the EIT, the European Innovation and Technology Institute, for their cooperation, and my colleagues at the EU delegation for their contribution. So I wish you a very interesting and intense Scale-up summits for the benefit of both European and Israeli economic operators. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Hopefully next year we will be in Tel Aviv for the fourth edition. And just to add one data point to the data that you provided in terms of the European presence in Israel, based on the research we will be presenting in a few minutes, 36% of the global corporates that have an innovation outpost in Israel are European. And Europe is the second among the global regions that have a stronghold of innovation in the startup nation. And so I think that is quite relevant. So thank you. And we are looking forward to continue to fill this bridge between Europe and Israel, not only Europe, with quality interaction and partnership. But now it's time to deep dive a bit more in terms of the role of Europe, and that's particularly where Europe is headed. And I think today we have the honor and the opportunity to hear from Jean-Marie Paquet, as mentioned. Jean-Marie is the Director General of DG Research and Innovation. And today we will touch base on three very important topics. As mentioned by the Ambassador, how Horizon 2020 is turning into something larger that is called Horizon Europe. Then the European Innovation Council that Jean-Marie is leading, and the EU Green Deal. And so I will pass the call on stage my partner in crime, Marco Marinucci, that will lead this conversation. Marco, the floor is yours from a very, very early Silicon Valley.
Indeed, it's very early here. As you can see, my lights are still on, meaning that outside is still dark. I think the only time that I used to wake up so early is to go skiing, but this is not exactly the time to go skiing. This is the time actually to have a very deep discussion with Jean-Eric Paquet. So Jean-Eric, is good to get connected again from a little bit afar. We had the pleasure of spending a good amount of time together in your trip to Silicon Valley back in February. It's just been 4 months, and I wish that we could just continue that conversation that got started there in the presentation of Horizon Europe from there. But I think these last 4 months have not been shy of surprises. So I think in between our conversation, it would be interesting to know what's been also the impact of this crisis in some of the plans that we so deeply discussed. So first of all, how has been the lockdown at the European Commission?
Marco, hi, Alberto, Emanuele. It's a pleasure to join you in Tel Aviv. As Emanuele said, I would have been delighted to travel again, and I had planned to do so. But we'll do it virtually for now, but there will certainly be an opportunity for me to come over rather soon, I think. Well, Marco, a lot happened, yes. And the last months have been crisis months everywhere in the world, of course, also in the European Union. We have peaked in terms of the pandemic, but the illness and COVID-19 are still very much present in Europe and across the globe. And I think it is true to say that this health pandemic, which is now followed, of course, by a deep economic shock, which has also deep social consequences, has had also a deep impact on the way the European Commission is working alongside our European nations, our member states. And what we have seen in COVID-19 and the European response to COVID-19, which is, I think, very much also part of a global effort, is that science and research have been very much at the heart of the public response. I mean, firstly, by providing scientific advice, which is, of course, in the context of a health pandemic, the only compass which can be meaningfully used by policymakers and by politicians. And I'm very proud to say that across the Union, all governments, including, of course, also the European Commission, have based their decision, and in a particularly challenging and moving environment. We have been dealing with a pandemic and with an illness at a scale and with a flow of ongoing uncertainties and information which is absolutely unprecedented. And across Europe, this was handled, I think, increasingly in a cohesive and impactful way, largely based on science and scientific advice. So I think that is certainly one important point to note. And I think going forward, this is for Europe also very important, because science is, of course, going into innovation, going into progress, going into development and wealth creation. And science is historically very much a European effort, but one which is also not necessarily across all parts of our societies today perceived as entirely benign. And I think seeing how much science has benefited society will certainly help us, policymakers on the one hand, but also citizens, to engage into a new conversation on how science and research can indeed feed our future. And that's certainly the second part of your question before we move into indeed programs and instruments and more specific developments. The second point, which I think is important to underline, is that in Europe, for the European Commission, for our President, Ursula von der Leyen, of course, for Maria Gabriel, who is in charge of research, but also education and youth, science, research and innovation will now need to be fully deployed. The knowledge, the technology, the space to experiment will need to be fully available if we are at the same time going to be able to recover from that crisis economically, repair our societies, and at the very same time, in fact, with the same resources, which will not be available a second time, at the same time deal with the digital green transformations, making Europe more resilient. So research and innovation has been very central in the toolbox of European public policies in the institution that is the European Commission, which is why we have indeed presented a couple of years ago this very ambitious Horizon Europe program, which is now being upgraded, and in terms of its outreach and we hope impact can be best used to move through the crisis into recovery and transformations.
Very good. I think for whomever is following the activities of the European Commission, I do think that, as you said, some of the activities that you oversee, if anything, have been accelerated by this crisis, and so we can talk about that. So we have a very diverse audience, typically, also from different countries. So to set the stage, give us a sense of what is actually your job. The size of the DG, kind of a high level, what is the DG that you are overseeing role within the framework of the European Commission?
Oh, okay. Well, Marco, research and research agencies are quite well developed in EU policies. We have had now 8 European programs on research and innovation over the last more than 25 years. The running program is called Horizon 2020. It's the 8th of those programs, and Horizon Europe, which is now, which preparation is now being finalized and rollout starts next year, is the 9th of those framework programs. So you have in the Commission a big department which I'm leading, DG Research and Innovation, which is, if you want, overseeing on the one hand these very powerful programs, but also promoting a European joined up research and innovation effort. And so the bulk of our work is, on the one hand, to use our own instruments, but also then to ensure that they, if you want, structure the European research and innovation space, which is still 27 different research and innovation spaces. In fact, a few more, because we work extremely closely with associated countries such as Israel, but also Norway or Switzerland, for example, or countries in the Western Balkans. And so the work done by my teams, which spans really all sectors of society and of the economy in a cross-cutting way. We don't do transport policy or energy policy. We are more looking at how we can combine solutions out of energy into transport to deal with climate change, for example. So we cover many of these areas. And on the one hand, we try to make available very powerful instruments, for example, partnerships with industry, or support to groundbreaking blue sky research with the European Research Council. But at the same time, also encourage our nation states, which are very powerful science, research, and innovation actors. 90% of the funding is in our member state national systems, to join much more systematically, so that we have, on the one hand, the amazing benefit of this diversity. We have 27 systems. We have 27 traditions. We have very strong institutions in many member states. And where the science is still to be developed, there's also a lot of ambition to be ramping up these investments into science, research, and innovation. So we have a diversity which generates ideas, new insights, new angles, and with that, powerful science and powerful innovation. But also what is needed, and that's what my teams try to do, is to get to critical mass and bring these national efforts also together where that is relevant. If you take AI or quantum computer, it's pretty clear that what needs to be invested needs to be done in a diverse way, but also with that critical mass to allow solutions to be ramped up, also in supercomputing, including to make Europe relevant, globally relevant, both in terms of competition, but relevant also in providing solutions. Because one of the, I think, important dimensions of Europe's science and research is that it's based on values, and that the purpose of our research is to create better outcomes for society, and where possible, this needs to be made available globally. The best example is the vaccine for COVID-19. I don't know in how far this debate reached Israel or our audience, but you have two very different approaches to vaccine development between the US and Europe, for example. In the US, the law is that vaccine development by companies and production, when funded by the taxpayer on the US side, is the priority for the US people. Whereas here in Europe, we want to develop a vaccine which is from the outset universally available, of course, also for Europeans, but not first for Europeans, and then we hope also at the same time making a real impact on the pandemic, which remains worldwide and particularly challenging. So the department it's 1,200 people, so it's not a small department, but next to it you have several agencies. So the combined research staff is more than 3,000. So it's a big operation, probably the biggest in the world. And the program itself is today nearly 80 billion euros over a 7-year period. And we will now move to 105 billion euros if, of course, our finance ministers grant us that funding. But I must say, with the illustration and the impact which we have had on COVID-19, I mean, there are results already, tests which are being made available, some compounds which have been tested with high-performance computing and which are very promising to treat the illness, a number of vaccines which are moving into clinical human clinical trials. All this demonstrates that European research makes a difference on the ground, not just in publications or in abstract high-impact factors, which are important but more difficult politically. And that, I think, is really making me rather optimistic that the next program will be indeed very ambitious. Again, as I said, allowing to drive recovery with transformations in the green area and in the digital sphere.
So let's dive into a little bit more of the details. I think you were here, as I said, in February doing some of the initial conversations, also with the ecosystem, with all the major universities, with the ecosystem of innovators and supporters and VCs, presenting some of the plans of Horizon Europe, as we said, is the next 7-year plan with the budget you just mentioned is over $100 billion. I was trying to see what is the latest, but it's definitely in that frame, in that range, and is building on as extremely successful, very well known by now, even outside of Europe, Horizon 2020, 80 billion euros, as you said, the last 7 years, and is the largest research and innovation program. So let's get a little bit more into kind of the details of what's the plan so far, what is the included into Horizon Europe, and if there is any strategic difference from the previous Horizon 2020 framework.
Yeah. No, thanks, Marco. There are a number of differences. I mean, maybe before I move to the differences, maybe just one element of continuity amongst others, but one which is for me very, very important, is that we will, of course, continue to fund through the program the European Research Council. I mentioned the European Research Council a moment ago. The European Research Council, if you want, is Europe's Nobel Prize factory. That's how I want to call it, because it is funding principal investigators with very generous grants, but on the basis of ideas which are entirely bottom-up, blue sky discovery research, which has been one of the most visible and I would say most impactful successes of European research in the last decade. The ERC was created a bit more than 10 years ago, and we will in the next program roll it forward as it is, with the best scientists in the world agreeing to spend a bit of their time to evaluate proposals, so that indeed this blue sky research is really the best which is possible, and is said very, very well funded, so that the principal investigator can over several years build up a team and move forward with his ideas, creating often new discoveries, and often also with a lot of impact, including a very concrete impact. Let me give you one example of COVID-19. We had a digital ERC grantee which was looking at voice recognition amongst others in its project, and which decided to redirect the project, and he is now essentially ready with a device which, from your voice, from the way you cough and the way you breathe, can detect the likelihood of COVID-19. just through voice or sound recognition, if you want. So that was blue sky research, and turns out to be possibly, let's see if this comes to the market, but a very, very concrete and very powerful outcome. So the European Research Council, our Nobel Prize factory, is going to be still there, very much so, and with a much, much increased budget. Now, the novelties in Horizon Europe are probably twofold. On the one hand, we hope to have even more impact in, as I said, provide technology, knowledge, and space to test solutions to drive societal transformations and economic transformations. This is not something which is entirely new. We've done that in the past already, but the effort in Horizon Europe is going to be of a different quality in the sense that it will be much more cross-cutting, so much less vertical, because that's quite well done by industry and often also at national level. What is often missing in these cross-cutting areas which are not so well covered. And what we also want to do is to, and we are, in fact, we have been doing it for the last 18 months, 2 years, is to decide not in our offices, but in co-creation, firstly across the entire institution of the European Commission, but then also with member states and with all interested actors. We want to identify where really the program could have maximum added value in driving green transformations, in biodiversity, in climate abatement, and in other green solutions linked, for example, to steel or to aviation. And then not just have funding which provides you with knowledge and technology which emerges, but effectively then connect this research and innovation effort with roadmaps which allow investment rolling out the solutions which will have been identified with the support of the framework program. So we will connect the program with policy, the full policy toolbox, and we will also connect it with a number of other investment instruments which exist at EU level, the recovery plan being one of them. I'll have the opportunity to come back to it, I'm sure. But also with industry investment, financing through, for example, the success of what we call the Juncker plan, where the European Investment Bank has benefits from guarantees under the EU budget to be a much more aggressive market player with loans and sometimes equity. All these are instruments which we want and can make available alongside regulation to ensure that the research and innovation outcomes feed into outcomes and transform our societies and our economy. So that's frankly particularly ambitious. It requires a lot of buy-in from our counterparts outside and also buy-in within the Commission. And as I said, we spent the last 2 years preparing the program with that ambition in mind. So that's one really deep change of the program, which we hope can have deep impact in society and in the economy. And this is where, I don't know, Marco, whether you will come back to the Green Deal, but this is where also the European Green Deal is so important. The European Green Deal, which was announced and is the priority together with making Europe a digitally forward-looking and equipped continent. The Green Deal is a defining moment for the Union, where we have said that by 2050 we will be climate neutral. By 2030 we will reduce our emissions by at least 40%, with comparing to 1990, possibly more, and this is super ambitious already. And that will require deep changes across our societies and our economy, and without not only with, but without solutions out of research and innovation, this will be extraordinarily complicated. I think this positions Europe, I mean, not only on the climate challenge at the forefront, that I think is understood and seen everywhere around the globe, but I would also argue that this will also position us in terms of economic and global competition, because this will generate industry outcomes in cars, in aircrafts, in steel, in the factories of the future, also the chemical industry, for example, which will turn this challenge of green transition into also a highly resource efficient effort. And therefore, in terms of competitiveness, I have little doubt that our industries in 10 years will lead, because these transformations, which will be front run in Europe, are needed elsewhere as well. So that's really one big component of Horizon Europe, and comes with it a number of instruments, the industrial partnerships particularly, but others as well. Now, the other major change, Marco, and maybe I stop here if you tell me you're coming back to it. The other major change is the creation of the European Innovation Council. I mean, if you want, maybe I pause here.
Yeah, let's cover that. Let's cover it real quick.
Yeah, should I cover the EIC? So the other big change is the European Innovation Council, which we are creating also with the new program. So the European Innovation Council, I mean, I'm sure you all already understood it, is the equivalent of the European Research Council. So the European Research Council, it's the Blue Sky Science, Nobel Prize Factory, okay? And the EIC is Europe's unicorn factory. The EIC did not exist. We are creating it from scratch as we speak this afternoon. The idea is to, I mean, and it's of course quite a complex instrument, but the bottom line of it is that it will be there to help Europe's deep tech innovation to scale up faster, and obviously scale up ideally largely, if not entirely, in Europe. Europe is contrary to what sometimes is perceived, quite strong in innovation. In fact, we are creating on a yearly basis more startups than anyone else. So that's not a problem. Ideas, talent, we have this extraordinary strong science and engineering basis. I mean, the engineering basis of Europe, I think, as far as I understand it, is unrivaled. And we are therefore, and we have also invested at regional level, industry level, national level, a lot of resources into support to early stage startups. So that funding and these instruments are powerful and are having impact in Europe. Many ideas and many companies are created absolutely every day. Now the challenge here, and it's the case not just in Europe, is the scaling up. And there we still are learning. And Marco, again, this was one of the reasons why I was so pleased with my visit to Silicon Valley, where you helped me so kindly. I saw a lot. I learned a lot, but I also saw that what we are preparing now in Europe makes sense. And the idea is that venture capital, in many cases, with a few exceptions, finds deep tech innovation very difficult. Firstly, because assessing science is not so easy. So it's not just an idea based on digital solutions. It's effectively looking at deep tech in biotechnology, deep tech in engineering, also deep tech in artificial intelligence or in a number of digital solutions, etc. So the science assessment is not so easy. So venture capital finds it often rather challenging. And then, of course, deep tech is in many cases, before product is indeed ready for the market, still requiring massive investment in real research, not just in product development. And that also is, by construction, highly risky. So even for very well-equipped and very agile venture capital, including those which I met in Silicon Valley, this is not an obvious proposition. And this is therefore where we are positioning the European Innovation Council. Significant funding for deep tech innovators to allow them to get their product into the market and help them to scale up. And this comes on the one hand with funding. So there's a grant component, which can be in the several millions of euros, depending on the idea and on the products which are to be developed. And we are here building on the well-known SME instrument, well-known including, and maybe in particular in Israel, where you have had many companies which were highly successful with the SME instrument. So this grant component would be available. But where we want to make a difference is by making available also from the outset equity, patient equity, which would then allow the companies, as the research, if you want, progresses, to then also be possibly more attractive for additional investors. So it's this combination, this blended funding and financing, which we hope can make a big difference on the EIC. Now, I'm not speaking about this in theory, because we are piloting the EIC at scale. We had already 4 call closures. We started last year, in October last year, with the first one. And if in 6 months, that's now a bit more than 6 months, 8 months, we had, I think, about 10,000 deep tech innovators coming to the program with ideas, many exciting ideas. And if I retain just those projects which were rated as highly impactful, our excellent projects on the idea and on the impact of the idea, we had already requests for funding of more than the budget which will be available for the next 7 years, more than 10 billion euros. And that is, of course, to an extent, a bit challenging, but it also demonstrates that the need is there, and that we will be, like a venture capital, be able really to only select those which have the biggest potential. And hopefully with that, we can make a major impact in driving innovation in Europe, scaling these unicorns into Europe. And I finish with that, Marco, and also against these transformations, against this Green Deal ambition, innovators will provide many of those solutions. I have no doubt. We can see it in COVID-19. We had an EIC call on COVID-19 with 36 companies which were selected. Amazing stuff in there. So I very much hope that these projects which are now starting can also help us in dealing with the pandemic. So the EIC, the next big ticket, already in town.
Great, that's already a call right there. So you cover a lot of ground, and so that some of the questions that I had, I think we're already ahead of us. But there is one area that I would like to go back to, because this, and clearly we don't have much time to go into the details, but that is the status of the EU Green Deal that seems to be giving more and more over time the bearings of where Europe is going at all different levels. And again, for the people that are less familiar with that, this is something that was launched officially November, December last year. An extremely, I think, visionary document that actually suggests people to read. You cannot not agree with that. And within that document, actually, I do have a few quotes that I think are worth of repeating, just to give a sense of what is also the depth of, clearly you mentioned the very end goal that is being zero net CO2 emission by 2050 as a continent, but within there, the number of measures that are touched on are extremely wide in range. So again, reading through the lines, transform the European area into a fair and prosperous society with a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy, where the economic growth is decoupled from resources use and aims to protect the health, as you mentioned before, and that's before COVID-19, and well-being of citizens from environmental-related risk. And the transition ought to be just and inclusive. It must put people first. So those are, I think, very, very strong words, and I do have a deep impact into really the fabric of the society and the role of policymakers as well. And it's clear that now all the policies at the European Commission level have a part that is becoming, I think, more and more central to support, to contribute to the Green Deal objectives. I just want to have very, very high level. I know that this is a much wider range of activities, but I know that also part of this very, very aggressive plans that also calls for at least 1 trillion euros or more of capital to be deployed is as a number of sub activities. I just wanted to have a very quick, in a quick version, a tweet version, updates of how that's been somewhat impacted also by the crisis there. And I give you just a few highlights. You pick whichever you think is more relevant. So one of the things that were supposed to be happening actually this month and is happening this month is the climate law that was supposed to be part of the legislation at the beginning of this quarter. Then I want to, maybe if you can give a very quick on that one. Let me go a few more. So the climate law, we mentioned about that, and the transition mechanism. Sorry, I was just looking for the right wording. The just transition mechanism. That is also one of the macro activities was supposed to happen these days, as well as the climate pact again by March 2020. What's a very very stage of those discussions within all the different areas?
Yeah, I mean we are. I mean, on track is not the right word, because there's not one track. As you said, this is the headline ambition. This is Europe's compass, if you want. And that compass is very much the one across most, if not all, of our societies and also all our member states. And that is not necessarily an obvious outcome. 2019 was really a defining year where beyond the science and the knowledge which is so widely available, and Europeans have always said that they broadly trust that science, and that they know that climate change is happening, and they also acknowledge, for vast majority of them traditionally, that this is largely man-made. So we are in contrast to other societies around the world, and this has then, in the course of 19, translated for the first time into a political election outcome in the European Parliament. And this then led to the establishment of the new European Commission, led by President von der Leyen. And herself, she is very, very strongly committed to the Green Deal and is entirely aware, also for personal reasons, that this is really now that we can still aim at dealing with it and have indeed impact on the societies which our children or grandchildren will live in. So the timing is, the urgency has, I don't think, never been felt as acutely in Europe than now. And this translates into indeed a very, very concrete policy agenda, which goes from a climate law through a number of investment instruments. Our European Investment Bank is now the declared European Climate Bank. They are really now prioritizing investment in climate relevant investments. And we have all sectors of the economy as standalone or in a more transversal way, which are looking at their own agenda. We had a strategy on biodiversity. It's not just climate, it's also the environment. And I think the pandemic of COVID-19 illustrates how we have been taxing on our natural resources, and how this then very concretely and directly can lead to these pandemics, for which we are then rather ill-equipped to deal with immediately. We also had a rather ambitious, very ambitious strategy on farm to fork, how you can indeed establish an agricultural policy which preserves biodiversity, has less impact on the environment, feeds Europe and the world where possible, and it can be seen as a climate sink. All this is not so easy to reconcile, but has been also been put in a policy paper. So it is very much here and now that this is being prepared and progressively being implemented. But the real policy point and is that we have been able politically, and now we need to implement it, we have been able to completely preserve that key priority against the need to now repair our economies. And I think there was a genuine question mark, and there was a lot of debate in the first weeks of the year as the pandemic was really taking root and the size of the economic shock was becoming visible, as to whether we were able at the same time to do balance sheet repair, keep people employed or in relevant unemployment mechanisms, and at the same time invest into climate. And here, of course, you could on the one hand say, as some do, that if you combine the fiscal effort across member states, we are already way beyond the trillion, way beyond the trillion, and this was immediately available. So this notion that 1 trillion is difficult to find for the green transition against the crisis, this is made available. And we will now add the next generation EU investment, so our recovery plan, the European contribution to the recovery plan, 750 billion, so not quite the trillion, but getting close to that. And this will, of course, be there to deal with the recovery, but through transformation in the green field and in the digital area. And I think the challenge for industries, but also for teams and public institutions, and mine in particular, is to demonstrate that you can do both at the same time. So can you indeed now in 21, 22, 23, can you do investments which will help economic recovery, which will be relevant for society and drive this transformation? Do we have the skilled workers? Can we help them retrain in this very, very short time frame, so that indeed they are earning a living and preparing themselves to to be available for housing transformation, for example. This is indeed very, very, very difficult. The timelines are of a totally different nature, but at the same time, the green challenge is also of short and medium term. So to an extent, if we get it right, the recovery will be a real booster for these green transformations. But the compass remains firmly in that direction, and I must say I'm quite proud of that.
And I think the European ambassador mentioned it, and there are a number of activities that fall under that umbrella, a number of opportunities for innovators that will take advantage of the opportunities of the EU Green Deal. And in the next couple of days in Israel, there will be a conference fully dedicated to that. So feel free to join if you are interested in the technical details. All right, I think we're out of time. I just want to have the last, very last question. That is, how do you measure these success indicators of, in particular, now we're talking about Horizon Europe as the next big framework. How do you guys internally measure, as literally as KPIs, of the success and the impact of a program?
Yeah, that's. I must say, this is work where we are hoping to also innovate a little bit, because we have, as is the case of most funders at EU level, at even world level, we have a number of quantitative indicators. So the number of applicants, the time we need to select them, the time for granting the funding, and we don't look enough at the outcome. And that is quite normal, frankly, because the challenge in research is that the outcome is whether the intended research, more or less open, blue sky very open, applied research much more specific, and how far has the research been properly carried out? Is there an outcome of the research project? That's very nice, and that can be measured. What, however, is much more interesting is, has this had any impact outside? Is there a real change which was generated by these research outcomes? Not necessarily a project in isolation, but at program level, I think this starts to be a bit more relevant to be measured. So we will now, as we prepare, we are now, as we prepare Horizon Europe, looking at a number of storylines around the Green Deal, around the digital transformation, around making Europe more resilient, around also the story of innovation in Europe, which I was trying to tell earlier on, to develop a number of substantial indicators, which then allow not just indicators to be presented, but this story to emerge. And that's what we're trying to do also in Horizon Europe. So hopefully we'll be able to show that the ambitions which I tried to sketch out were delivered. But we are really preparing very well for that.
Jean-Eric, what should I say? I mean, as a European living in Silicon Valley in a long time, it actually makes me very proud. The work that you guys are doing there is transformational, and so we'll all see, I think, the result out of that. So we're out of time. Thanks again for your input. It's been a pleasure, and I pass it back to Alberto.
Grazie.
Okay, thank you. So let's go back to our program. Just to give you a sense of what is the Scaleup Summit, the digital version of the Scaleup Summit. Typically, we were supposed to meet for 2 days, closed door inside, technically Tel Aviv Stock Exchange this time. Typically, we do that across the globe, hosted by the main stock exchanges. And so typically it was a 2-day program where the large part was one-to-one meetings between corporate and startups. And there was also opportunity to exchange views and prospects. So the current agenda of the Scaleup Summit is the one that you can see in this picture. And substantially you see it as being almost not having any travel restriction. We decided to scatter the different activities across 1 month. And so substantial will be the one-to-one matching component. Startup versus corporate will be Thursday and Friday and Monday next week. So Thursday, Friday this week and Monday next week. Then we have some preparation work for Scaleup. We have a corporate insight session last week where we presented the corporate that we're about to meet this week and next week one-to-one. And then we have an open innovation bootcamp last week, This is the next slide, where you can see we went through to approximately 40 innovation executives from multiple corporates, multiple industry, to discuss about the very topics that currently corporate are dealing with innovation are facing. So meaning how to measure the return of innovation, how to improve the relationship with the business unit, how to optimize investment, corporate venture capital, how to reconsider, rethink the corporate accelerator model and the startup studio concepts. And then we also had the opportunity to present the corporate partners at the highest level. And this is what is called the industry expert view. That is the next slide. And you can see we also wanted to provide a vision of the Israeli ecosystem from top-notch leaders. So we have the pleasure to have Zev Holtzman presenting us what is the secret of Israel. We have a very interesting conversation with Nathalie Refoua, that is partner of Viola Grow, to discussing how Israel is moving into definitely more later stage territory. This Thursday, we'll discuss with Ravit Varsha, that is the partner of Kamet Ventures, to discussing specifically what the concept of venture building out applied in Israel. And then we will close the series on Monday next week with Aaron, that is the Chief Executive Officer of the Israel Innovation Authority. And as mentioned, we also had the opportunity to give the floor to the top innovation executives, that is the next slide, of some of our corporate partners, in a way that they can present how they are approaching innovation from the voice of the CEO in the case of Enel, or from the Chief Innovation Officer from the case of many others. And so this has been the opportunity also to recreate digitally some relations that typically we were able to physically bring in a specific place for 2 days. And typically during the summit, we also take the opportunity to present some our latest research highlights. Specifically, this is the next slide. We will present, and actually the official presentation will be on Monday next week during as mentioned, the climate forum organized by the European delegation of the European Union. And specifically today, I just want to give you some highlights in terms of what being the main research finding of this research that is titled Corporate Innovation in Israel. First of all, if someone has any doubt why corporates are looking at Israel, this data should definitely clear your mind. You can move one slide down, please. As you might see, this is the number of, in the first line, you can see the number of scale-ups, and the third line is the capital invested into Israel. And you can compare with other ecosystems. And you can see substantially that in Israel, we mapped about 1,600 scale-ups. That, compared to a population of approximately 8-9 million people, equals to 18 scale-ups per 100,000 inhabitants. That is a very density of scale-ups. There is just one place in the world that have an higher density. This is Silicon Valley. But if you look at the other areas like the United States, Europe, China, you see density that is definitely smaller. And also, if you look at the capital invested, $49 billion, this number is quite impressive. It equals, compared to the GDP of Israel, to the 11%. And this ratio, again, excluding Silicon Valley, is one of the highest in the world. That tells you why corporates are increasingly looking at innovation and looking at innovation in Israel specifically. If you go to the next slide, you can see the number of corporates that have an innovation output in Israel. We're talking about 160 approximately corporates from all over the world. Obviously, 52% of them are coming from North America, notably the US. And as mentioned, 32% are from Europe.
And if you look at the specific countries behind the United States, Germany and France, United Kingdom and Japan are the ones that have a presence of definitely more than 10 innovation outposts. When we talk about innovation outposts, we are mentioning a stable presence of organizations that have a single main dominant goal that is looking for innovation. That can happen in multiple forms, might be in the form of a simple antenna to trend spots, identify more interesting startups, to an innovation labs, to a research center, or to having an investment purpose. If you go to the next slides, you can see also the breakdown by industry, and you can see that substantially the presence of corporates in Israel specifically has a larger dominance for company in the electronics industry, 18% of the outposts, and the IT and software, 18% of the outposts. And then we have some important presence of other industries like finance and banking, 11%, automotive, 9%, and manufacturing, 9%. Overall, we have about 20 different industries that are looking at innovation in Israel. Moving to the next slides, you see, as mentioned, there might be the presence, the innovation presence in Israel or in World Tech clusters might be multiple form. That would be the simple linear form that is called the innovation antenna. Then we can have what is called an innovation lab, where they are accelerating, experimenting innovation together with local startups. Then there'll be an R&D center, substantially definitely larger and more structured presence. And that could be a CVC, meaning corporate venture capital, meaning a presence with the focus on investing into startups. If we look at the data in terms of our next slides, the different presence of global corporates are in Israel, you can see that the most dominant form in Israel is the one represented by the R&D centers. 54% of the overall innovation outpost. This is followed by CVC and Corporate Innovation Lab that substantially have a slightly less than the half. If you go to the next slides, you can see some data point in terms, and the first interesting data point that is quite astonishing if you look at, if we consider all the people that are focused on working on innovation in Israel, they add up to something between 40 to 45,000 people. So in Israel, there is 45,000 people employed by global corporations that are focused on hunting, let's say, innovation in Israel. And this is an astonishing data that is almost the double compared to Silicon Valley. And the reason is that, as specifically what we were saying before, that the most dominant presence is the one represented by the R&D, Research and Development Centers. That you see, they're talking about, we have 57 outposts that employ more than 200 people. Typically, an R&D center is a very, very large and structured presence. And so one of the main reasons for these corporates to come to Israel is also to access to talent and knowledge that is embedded into Israel. Another interesting trend, if you go to the next slides, is that similarly as is happening in Silicon Valley, beyond the R&D centers that are still important and relevant as one of the characteristics of Silicon Valley, there is a growing trend of corporates that are having definitely more linear presence in Israel, represented by CVCs. You see that the number of CVCs has become 3 times higher compared than 10 years ago and increased by 60% in the last four years. And then another interesting form of presence in Israel that is very typical in Silicon Valley and is less typical in Israel, but is becoming definitely more the norm, is what is called innovation antennas. So very, very lean structure, 1 to 2 people, maximum 5 people that are definitely have a presence in Israel looking for innovation. Next. Where in Israel, obviously, Tel Aviv is becoming an international innovation hub, and there is no doubt about that, particularly if you also consider the close buyers idea. But substantially, we have some other areas in Tel Aviv that is becoming relevant, and specifically talking about R&D, Haifa and Jerusalem is becoming definitely more and more relevant. Last slide. Actually, it's not last slide. There are a few more. This year we also added an analysis of corporate investments into Israel. Let me just give you the highlights. I leave to the reading of the report for getting all the data. But substantially, we see that on the one way, this is no news, is that overall capital invested into Israel has doubled compared to 5 years ago. You see the numbers that we're talking about. It was 3.5 billions in 2015, and now it's about 7.3 billion. This is all overall venture capital and corporate venture capital investment. If you focus the analysis on corporate venture capital and corporate investments only, you can see that the corporates have a strong role in Israeli investments because they contribute to 34% of the deals and 45% of the capital invested. And another interesting data point, I leave you to the reading of the report, that it looks like that corporates are able to anticipate investing trends. Particularly, they are increasing investment before the peak. And so they did it in 2016, and then investment peaked in 2017, and they have done the same in 2018, and then investment peaked in 2019. So the slightly reduction of investment that we saw last year might, in a certain way, anticipate a slower investment ramp for Israel this year. Next slides. Talking about where corporates are investing in terms of industry, obviously the most relevant areas, as mentioned, are IT, enterprise software, despite there is a growing interest in clean tech. And that's why the forum, next Monday forum of Green Deal and climate is very, very timely. And next slides. In terms of investment, corporates typically tend to invest into more mature startups. This is also consistent with a trend that is the trend was called mega rounds that we are experiencing in the last few years in Israel. And then final slides. This is a short comparison, Israel versus Silicon Valley. Again, as mentioned, we have 155 global corporates that have an innovation presence in Israel. In Silicon Valley are 222, definitely a larger number. If you look at the number of people that are deployed, the booths, innovation booths on the ground, you see that in Israel, despite they have a lower number of outposts, they have a larger number of people. This is due to the presence of R&D that typically are larger. You're seeing about 40,000 approximately people employed in innovation in Israel by corporates versus 25,000 in Silicon Valley. In terms of investments, Silicon Valley is definitely larger. It's probably 10 times higher. You can see that the average investment in the past 10 years from corporates into Silicon Valley are about 24 billion versus 2.2 in Israel. In terms of number of deals, the ratio is not 10x, but it's probably 3-4x. We have a 550 plus investments, number of deal involving corporates in Silicon Valley versus 167 investment on average in Israel. In terms of industry, Israel more on electronics, is more on IT and software, while Silicon Valley is definitely a stronger focus on automotive and finance and banking, despite the fact the latest data is showing that Israel is definitely catching up. So this is the numbers that I wanted to present you. The report, as mentioned, will be released on Monday next week in occasion of the climate forum organized by the European Embassy. And so I will, this is the link that you can definitely download from our website. And so hope you will enjoy it. That said, it's time to go back to our planning. And Marco, I leave the mic to you.
Okay. All right. So now we're moving into the more technical side of the summit. That's when the matching of startups and corporates will start to take place. If we were physical here, we start moving into parallel rooms. The one thing that we're going to start with, though, is with an introduction of the corporate partners that are participating actively into the research of solutions. And so the first exercise that we're going to do, we ask them to actually behave like startups and do the impossible, that is presenting within 5 minutes each what they are looking for, a little bit of the context of where they're headed in terms of innovation, in particular when it comes to the few challenges that have activated and which kind of solutions they're looking for again, one after the other. So we have a few coming up, and then we'll have a very quick introduction of the 70+ startups that have been selected for this matching. So without further ado, let's start one by one. We're going to start with Enel, one of our longtime partner, and I'm going to pass it over to Eran Levy, that is the general manager at the Enel Innovation Hub in Israel. Eran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. Hi, everyone. I'll start quickly with a very quick introduction of Enel. It's a multinational energy company based in Italy with about 70,000 employees in 32 countries, mainly in Europe and Latin America. Revenues of about more than $80 billion. It's the largest producer of energy from renewable resources in the world, out of China. And in Israel, we started the activity about 4 years ago in order to find innovative technologies. And the reason for it, next slide, please, is that the energy sector is going through a radical transformation. If you can see in the slide, second slide, so this transformation is, we can see it in almost every level of the industry: decarbonization, electrification, digitalization, and a new approach of the customer. And this is the reason that we really depend on innovation, because this industry cannot last long with current models and the current approach. Next slide, please. This is the one more. So we've opened up the first innovation center in Israel about 4 years ago. Now, after 4 years of hard work, we became a network of 13 innovation labs and hubs around the world. Only in Israel, we're operating now 2, and we have the 3. We're going to open the third one in the upcoming months. So in Haifa, we have a lab that is startups in the construction tech area and smart infrastructure. This is basically the digitalization of our assets. In Tel Aviv, we are the innovation hub that is working across all the company with the different business lines. So, for example, it's not only energy or renewable energy, it's analytics, for example, is a business unit that is operating the e-mobility business, electric mobility. And we have also the smart city line business, and we have the smart home line of business and industry 4.0. So we have basically a lot of business lines that we need to provide with the service. Same we have also in Boston, Milan, Silicon Valley, Santiago de Chile, Rio de Janeiro, and actually in each one of these territories, we're working with a local innovation ecosystem in order to look for the best technologies that fits our specific needs. Next slide, please. So until now, we've been evaluating more than 6,000 startups for our different business lines. We have a very organized procedure of how to assess and evaluate startups. Eventually, we activated more than 250 projects around the world and scaled up more than 50 out of this number. Scale up means that, let's start with the project. Project is basically proof of concept when we test the technology on our physical assets on production level. And then once we understand that we have the right solution, we scale it up. We basically take it and activate it on the real time, on the real world in any of our assets around the world. Next slide, please. This is only the example of the different business lines that we're working with in our company and the different technologies that we apply on each one of them. So as you can see, we use a lot of different technologies from industry IoT to robotics and drones and performance optimization and sensoring and any other technology in solar, hydro, wind. So we really look for many kinds of technology. My time's up, right? Okay.
Yeah, that is actually working. So thank you, Ran. Thanks for actually good to see you again. It's been a while, but thanks for the introduction and gave a good sense of what NL is working on. So next up, we're going to have CNH, Daniele Pozzo.
Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, according to where you are. And today I'm going to introduce a company I work for that is FPT, part of CNH Industrial Group. So maybe quite complicated acronym. I will try to explain you in the next 4 minutes. So if we go to the first chart, we are just explaining you that FPT is part of a huge organization, a $28 billion company that makes many machine and vehicle that probably you are all familiar, because the company operates in the segment of the agriculture with New Holland and Case and Steyr brands, in the business of construction machinery with Case and New Holland construction brands, and in the commercial vehicle business, so Iveco and Heuliez Bus brands. And what is in common with all these vehicle and machine that I mentioned is that behind them there is one company, part of the group, that provide powertrain solution to all of them and to also external customers. That company is FPT. If we move to the next chart, I can highlight some numbers of the global company. So 64,000 of employees and 56 R&D centers spread all over the world. That makes commercial vehicle, agriculture, construction equipment, and powertrain business. If we move to the next chart, this is FPT, so a company that manufacture every year roughly 600,000 industrial engine and more than 230,000 axle transmission. And those powertrains are dedicated to the internal customer that I mentioned before, but please remember that 50% of our business is dedicated to third-party customer outside the group. And the brand is pretty new. If we move to the next chart, please. So less than 15 years since the brand has born, but the company has more than 150 years of existence, because it begins when the engines were working with the steam, then moved to internal combustion engine in diesel, and now moving in the transition of the decarbonization with also acquisition and joint ventures in the electrification field that I will touch in a few seconds. But today we have also to speak about innovation, and innovation for us means R&D center. If we move to the next chart, we can show you where we do where innovation takes place for CNH Industrial, but in particular for FPT, because out of the 56 R&D center of CNHI, there are more than 10 R&D centers spread all over the world, in the US, in Latin America, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific. The core for FPT of the R&D happens in Switzerland, in Arbon, where we have our R&D center. And more, we are approaching the innovation also through inorganic growth and external collaboration. If we move to the next one, we can show you that for us, innovation is linked to our core business, so the production of industrial powertrain, both in diesel and natural gas, but also on a continuous, more important business, that is the electrification. And so on those three streams, I can show you in the next chart what we are doing as a global company. Concerning fuel cell and electrification, CNH Industrial started a collaboration, an investment and a collaboration with the Nikola Trucks that you will see soon on the street, and that this company has been listed on the Nasdaq a few weeks ago. Other activities that involve collaboration and inorganic innovation, if we move to the next chart, is the collaboration that we launched a few months ago with Microvast, and in particular concerning FPT, the acquisition of a UK company that is called Potenza, that is working in the battery monitoring system. And last but not least, if we come back to the core of our product, the combustion engine, we have been also active in the acquisition of startups like Dolphin, if we move to the next chart, last chart, that show that there is still room of improvement and going in decarbonization, working on game-changing engine technology.
Daniele, thank you for the introduction and to stay within the 5 minutes. I know that is a lot to talk about. Congratulations also on some of your transactions. The one with Nikola in particular is very visible and exciting, and we're also equally excited to have you guys on board. So thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
Next up, we're going to move from manufacturing to insurance and insurtech. We'll have Bruno Scarra from Unipol.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm sorry, my camera isn't working. I'm head in Unipol Research and Activation New Business Solutions. So in summary, I'm in charge both of scouting of startups that could accelerate our business, and also both in the pilot development and follow industrialization if a solution works. I have attached 3 slides to explain you Unipol and our approach to innovation. So let's move on the first slide. Okay. Unipol Group has the largest agency network in Italy. So it's 2,600 agents with about 8,000 points of sale. So this is one of our main assets that we have. And also Unipol is leader in Italy in non-life business, and in particular in motor, where another important asset is that we have 4 million of customers with black box installed in their cars. So that is a very important component of our asset. And we have globally 6 million of customers overall, and about 14 billion of direct premium income. It's important to say that mainly our business is in Italy. So that is very important. So in contrary of the previous presentation, we are based in Italy. We have also a dedicated unit that is called Unisalute, that provide health insurance for corporate companies, so in the B2B market. And we have insured here about 6 million of customers, so with a large network of medical center. If we go in the next slide, in terms of innovation, our 3 main ecosystems where we focus are new mobility, health, home and property. New mobility, as we are a leader in Italy in motor insurance, we focused in this ecosystem in 2016. And last year, after a successful pilot of sales of long-term car rental to using our tied agent network, we acquired an important company of long-term car rental, that is CarServer. CarServer was mainly focused on B2B business, but now we are integrating this company in our business to use this company also in the retail business using our large network of tied agents. The other area important for us as ecosystem is health, where we have Unisalute. And also here we are searching new solutions that could help the growth of that business. In terms of a third ecosystem at home and property, here we launched recently in our network the sales of utilities contract for electricity and gas. Clear key areas of innovation for all of this ecosystem are, of course, digital, telematics, robotics. If you move in the next slide, our approach, so we have saw the ecosystem, and our approach is to use open innovation as a tools to find through the network, through using Mind the Bridge and other sources, to find the startups that could help to accelerate, especially in the business that we call behind insurance. So business that we can attach to our core business insurance that could leverage our business, as we have done with the long-term car rentals. We use also advanced analytics and big data, because inside of our company we have a specific company that manages with data scientists this type of data. And we use an agile approach, so with startups to do the pilot, to do a prototype, and then to industrialize all of this. And to have a sort of success, we try to manage initiatives that are medium and long term, because there are some innovative ideas that maybe are not so ready for the market, but we start anyway to test and pilot. And of course, like in the case of long-term rental, is more close to our medium objective. At the end, the goal is to create innovative business solution for our customer and agency network. So that's all for our company and for our approach to innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Thanks for being right on time. This is working well so far. So I can tell that also corporates have been well trained. Now we're going to move from the insurance world into construction in Spain in particular. We have Javier Gonzalez, Open Innovation Manager at Acciona.
Hello. Thank you, Marco. Thank you for the opportunity to present Acciona. Acciona is a large Spanish company working on renewable energy projects and infrastructure solutions all over the world. Our main businesses are energy and construction, but we are very active in other sectors like water, services, industrial, among others. And we are present in 65 countries with almost 40,000 employees. So with more than 10,000 megawatts, next slide, please. Thank you. With more than 10,000 megawatts deployed all over the world, it means that we are the largest energy company dedicated 100% to develop only renewable energy projects. So there is a strong commitment to innovation and sustainability. We try to build what we call business as unusual. Next slide, please. So business as unusual based in two pillars, sustainability and innovation. In terms of sustainability, more than 70% of the SDG targets are considered to be linked to the development of enabling infrastructures. So it's part of the core business. And we are carbon neutral company since 2016. So also Acciona is considered the greenest utility of the world. And related to innovation, we have 3 R&D centers, one for energy, working in applications of new technologies like large scale storage, one for construction, working on construction processes on new materials, and one for water, more focused on chemical processes to be applied toward the desalination plants and water treatment processes. And also a corporate innovation to support their activities and generate transversal opportunities. Next slide. So this is not enough. We want to run faster than ever, not only to be more competitive, but also to survive. Next slide. This is the reason why we create Innovation. Innovation is a platform that reflects the way that we want to innovate. We are taking advantage of new technologies from startups and partners, and also trying to leverage the knowledge and the know-how of R&D centers and innovation teams. And at the end, we want to generate new revenues and new business models. Next slide. And these are the results. But it's not about the number of the projects launched or startups involved. It's about the people. almost 300 people have been working in our collaboration program with startups. And the most important KPI for us, 2/3 of the startups involved sign an agreement directly with the business at the end of the program. Next slide. And how to do that? These are some of the ingredients that we have. The first one is challenges. Challenges identified directly with the business units, with the commitment of the decision makers from the beginning, and a framework to support all the collaboration between startups and business units. And the other part, steps for the startups, of course. An output that could be, let's continue the pilot project directly with the business, or you can be a new supplier of Acciona, and why not? Let's explore new opportunity together as a partner. So next slide. And this is the approach. We want to be more open, more disruptive, more digital, trying to find also opportunities and synergies across the organization in order to transform our businesses. But we think that it's a powerful tool to transform other industries. We are not entering the mobility sector. We are trying to transform the mobility sector through renewable energy and new infrastructure solutions. And we are partnering, for instance, with mining companies in Chile in order to find solutions with startups to make more sustainable their processes. Next slide. And these are the opportunity areas for collaboration with Acciona. Let's say advanced delivery, technologies around logistics and last mile delivery, for instance, sustainable mining. We are looking for new solutions to transform the mining processes. In construction tech, how to improve the way that we deliver the construction projects, mainly civil works. In connected assets, everything related to operation and maintenance. In smart mobility, we are the biggest motor sharing operator in the world, so we are looking for new opportunities in this topic. And in terms of energy transition, how to offer new renewable energy-based solutions to our clients. And that's all. Thank you for attending.
Very good. Thank you, Javier. Good to see you again. And congratulations again on the progress that Acciona is having in the integration with the startup solution. Right. So now next up, we're going to move back to manufacturing. We have Saipem. And from Saipem, we have Tomasz Polski-Kostia, Head of Innovation Factory.
Good afternoon to everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Saipem. If we can show slides, please. Saipem, next, please. Saipem, we are a global solution provider in energy and infrastructure sector. We engineer and build some of the most complex projects worldwide, from offshore oil and gas platforms to onshore petrochemical complexes, from urea plants to offshore wind farms lately. In our projects, we always offer solutions. Some of them are proprietary, but many of them come from our valued partners. And we very strongly support energy transition. Actually, we aspire to become one of the key enablers of that in our industry. Finally, we build responsibly, taking care of health and safety of our people, paying attention to environment and to local communities in which we operate. Next slide, please. Okay, with more than 30,000 people, we are present in more than 70 countries worldwide. Next one. Our history goes back to 1950s, and we have been evolving for more than 6 decades now. And what is worth mentioning is that current crisis, despite it's very difficult, but it's not the very first crisis that we face, and we have always overcome things like that, thanks to dedication and commitment of our people. Next one, please. A few financials. So typically we have revenues in the range of 9–10 billion a year. Our EBITDA margin is typical for our sector, 10–15%, and is not shown here, but at the moment we have quite a significant backlog of projects in the region of 25 billion euros. Next one, please. Okay, our strategic pillars are sustainable business, health and safety, and innovation, importantly. Next one. And in terms of innovation, again, for our sector, we invest very relevant resources in terms of money, in terms of management attention, in terms of people. Closer to our businesses, we operate 10 technology innovation centers. Maybe some of the most notable are our subsea robotics and ROV center in Trieste, Italy, or like welding and NDT innovation center in Romania. We produce a lot of patents, but also we have set up an innovation factory, which I lead, in order to look really in disruptive and uncharted territories of innovation. Next one. Through our partnership with Mind the Bridge, which we appreciate a lot, we focus on 3 specific verticals. First one is oil and gas decarbonization, where we look at deep tech technologies, but also digital technologies, energy efficiency, electrification of oil and gas sector, and CO2 management. By the way, last year we acquired a startup technology, a very innovative carbon capture solution, CO2 solutions from Canada. Second vertical is construction technology, where we look at digital assets, digital twins of our plants. As I mentioned, we have a very important backlog of projects to be built, so we're always very attentive to technologies that can help us to better manage activities and progress of our projects, connected worker, welding and NDT, and importantly, we look at clean technologies, specifically offshore wind, ocean energy, hydrogen, and circular economy, water waste management, and converting into resources. Thank you very much. I hope I was on time.
You were right on time. Thank you, Tomasz. Thanks for your presentation. We're going to stay in the oil and gas field and decarbonizations. Now we have good to see an old good friend presenting for Eni, Silvia Fierro.
Hi, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, Marco.
Hi.
Thank you. So Silvia Fierro here, and I'm part of the Digital and Open Innovation Unit at Eni. I'm very pleased today to give you an overview on our activities, processes in regards to the digitalization journey mainly, and of course the open innovation processes that we structured. So briefly, so some numbers of Eni. Eni is an energy company in the oil and gas sector, active working in 66 countries with more than 30,000 employees. We cover all the value chain from the exploration part through the shipping and at the end to the downstream, so the B2C market, B2B market, and of course the chemical. So we will see actually after that we will cover also these areas also with the open innovation goals that we have. Recently, beginning of 2018, Eni has started and structured the approach towards the digitalization and opened our team actually with now more than 100 dedicated professionals into the digitalization process. So what drives our digitalization journey? So in the next slide, you will see that we have actually one team that is the demand management team that is in charge to grasp and to organize the needs of the business units following the 4 strategic goals that you see here. So we are actually trying to excel in asset integrity and safety. We are boosting company efficiency and, of course, ensuring stakeholder centricity without, of course, forgetting one of our mission strategic goals, that is the decarbonization path. But in terms of technologies, you can see here that we are looking at the 5 clusters that you see here. And I would say that in particular, we are interested in models in artificial intelligence that can be applied to our plants, and robotics, and of course, industrial IoT that we can use to predict or to use it as, of course, asset integrity new tools. Then where we look for these new solutions, new digital solutions. So we have, of course, partnerships. One is with Mind the Bridge. We'll look for Scaleup scale-ups mainly, so mainly with products in the market that are able already to be scaled internally in our plants or in our employees and of course projects. We have partnerships with universities in Italy mainly, and it's recent the partnerships that we signed with the MIT in Boston last year. We participate in conferences, the roundtables, hopefully a little bit more next year. And also we partner with other big companies also on others topics. So in the next slide, so the focus that we have in the oil and gas sector and in E&I when approaching open innovation topics, I would say that are these four. And for the scouting that we run in partnership with Mind the Bridge, we focused on the first one, so the gas station of the future, and the fourth one, so the energy transition and photovoltaic systems. So when it comes to gas station of the future, we're actually trying to figure it out how to, of course, add new services, I would say, to our customers. And of course add new business models into the of course gas stations that we already have in Italy mainly. Then when it comes to the energy transition side, the focus is on the photovoltaic system, as I said, and the interest here is both related to the maintenance of the asset, and on the other hand is of course the weather forecasting in order to predict either the peaks or the downside of the assets that we have. On the next slide, just in a nutshell how we work. So internally in our open innovation department, we have 5 professionals that divided by topics. So we, of course, go through a lot of scouting and analyzing startups. So I would say that the first 2 sections are on our side. So we do normally run the selection and all the analysis of startups, and then we present them to our business unit. And then, of course, to test it and to prove their value, then we go on a scale on the scaling phase. So that's all. I would say thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to having meetings during next days.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you for the presentation. Good to see you again. Also need to apologize with Kostya before. I think I butchered your name. Sorry for that. That's one of the issues of having to start at 5 in the morning in California. We're almost through the end. Next, another utility. This time is actually with water, and we're presenting Acea with Carmelo Graceffa. Hi, Carmelo. You're on. Maybe he cannot hear. Should we try one more time with Carmelo? Otherwise, we move to Terna. This is the beauty of going live. Carmelo, we could see you. Probably you cannot hear. We're going almost perfectly through the end. Carmelo, can you hear us?
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm
Hi.
Carmelo Graceffa, and I'm responsible of the innovation unit in Acea. Acea is one of the main utilities company in Italy, and we operate in different businesses. We manage the networks and the services in the water, energy, and environmental sectors. In the water sectors, you can show the slide, Carmine. In the water sector, Acea is the leading operator in Italy with 9 million people served in 4 Italian regions. And we perform specific activities during every phase of the supply chain. We are very committed to safeguard the springs and manage the water resource in a sustainable way, and raise awareness to responsible consumption for the resource. In the energy sectors, regarding the infrastructures, we operate in Rome, and we are one of the main operators in Italy in the energy distributions. We also manage around 200,000 lighting points in the artistic and public lighting. We also produce electricity via hydroelectric power plants and thermoelectric plants, and we are also present in the photovoltaic sector. And regarding the market side, we are one of the main operator in Italy for sale electricity and natural gas, and we are working on different smart services to generate added value for our customer. For the last one sector, the environment sector, we are the major operator in Italy in waste management with 1.2 million tons of waste managed. And with various treatment processes, we produce electricity through waste to energy plants, and we produce compost and biogas from sludge and organic waste. We also manage plastic recycling, but we are also present overseas, and Acea is present in Latin America in different regions, and we serve approximately 4 million people. And we operate there under partnership agreements with local and international businesses. In the next slide, we can take a look at our innovation needs in the different sectors I showed before. In the water sector, we search innovative solutions that help us to develop a smart water company and improve the quality and efficiency of the services. And we want to find innovative solutions for the leak reduction and the preservation of the water, and improve the water analysis. In the energy sector, regarding infrastructures, we are working on different projects to boost the energy transition and enabling the decarbonization of the system. And we are looking for innovative solutions to increase the network resilience and create a smart grid to enable new services. And of course, boost the green energy production. In the commercial side, we want to improve our quality of services and the customer journey, and boost our digital channels. And we are launching new smart services. One of these regard the e-mobility, where we are working about an e-mobility platform. In the last one, in the environment sector, we want to boost the circular economy and optimize the waste treatment performance. And we want to find solutions to be sufficient in sludge treatment. That's all. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Carmelo. I'm happy that we made it work. Now we have just a last presentation from the corporate partners. We have Piero Rosina from Terna, not ready. I guess that then, if he's not ready now, we can anticipate maybe the quick presentation from our head of advisory and scouting. Piero is there. Okay, Piero from Terna.
Hi, yes, hi everybody. Thank you for the invitation. And you can please show, the presentation. I can't see the presentation, just see myself. Okay, here we are. Thank you. Okay, I have a quick, let me say, introduction to Terna. I don't know how much familiar you are with this TSO, this transmission system operator. What we would like just to highlight here is that Terna plays the role as national high voltage transmission, grid manager. And it manages planning, development, and maintenance, i.e. the asset. That is the role that is called TO, transmission operator. But there is also the dispatching of electricity, and that's the role of SO, system operator. Is a listed company with the largest presence of international investors, among the Italian companies. Just a quick overview of the assets in Italy, mainly. We have over 73,000 kilometers of power lines, and we have about 40,000 kilometers of optical fibers. There are some, let me say, 900 transforming stations and 220 towers, that are the towers for the overhead lines, support. And we have, that's important, 25 interconnections between Italy and the rest of Europe. And in all these interconnections, there is also an optical fiber interconnection. People employed is in the range of 44,000. So that's, let me say, the highlight about what we do in Italy. If you can please go ahead, to the following chart. Well, that's just a very quick representation of a traditional view of the electric system. Terna is responsible for the balancing of the electric system, and usually you have, the generation, i.e. the production. Then you have the high voltage, transmission. Then you have the distribution. Then the users, the client, the customers. That might be, in the consumer level of the commercial and industrial level as well. The issue is that this is an old representation because with the energy transition, this kind of ordered approach is not such any longer. And that's due to what is called energy transition. Could you please go ahead to the following chart? Here we are, and actually what you can immediately see in this chart, that is a simplified versions, of course, is the fact that we are facing some very relevant technological evolution that are sort of changing, the condition of the electric system. Specifically, we have the impact of renewables, we have the energy efficiency, we have the electric mobility as a whole. Then, of course, we have storage, because that's quite important to be considered, and then digitization. But digitization is just, let me say, a support. Right? It's not a trend per se, for the modification of the system. Well, in a nutshell, what is going on is pretty simple. We have an increasing number of sources of generation. You can consider that, let me say, almost 10 years ago, we were talking about 600 relevant plants for generation. Nowadays, we are talking about 800,000, plants. And that means that renewables is distributed first, and second is in many cases, two ways, because you have, generation that is not just a generation per se, but you have also consumption, mainly in the same area. So all these things together, are reshaping what we call, the energy system. And in order to keep, the balance of the energy system, what is needed is to work on some drivers and new technologies. And this is exactly what we have been identifying, within Terna as relevant technology to support this energy transition, model. If you can go ahead, please, to the following chart. Specifically, we have been working on competencies and assets. One of the assets was already mentioned, i.e. the optical fiber. But in parallel with that, we're talking about distributed computing. Just to give you an idea of the fact that if we want to keep under balance, the system, it is important for us to avoid very long round trips. So that means that we have to have distributed data centers that are interconnected, and these are verticalized, on the phenomena that are happening nearby. This is exactly the kind of things that we have to address specifically. We have been working on computing, smart grids, telecommunication, connectivity, energy management system, i.e. on all the elements that are supporting the possibility to have, the energy transition. These are also the relevant, of course, relevant technology that we have in mind, for our developments. On top of this, just to finalize, the concept, considering that we have to manage a system that is synchronous and with all the let me say, the physical things happening, you know, at the speed of the light, because that's exactly what happened. We cannot go faster or be more, let me say, more rapid than the phenomena that are happening themselves. So basically, we have to have a forecasting capabilities, and that has to do with big data and analytics. So all in all, these are the things that we have to consider when we talk about this system. If you can go ahead, please, with well, I skip this one because there are a bunch of things that we're doing, but that's probably this one to conclude is these are the technology clusters, you know, that we have in mind. So analytics, what we call full industrial IoT, advanced materials, because we need to have also new materials, you know, to be employed in our infrastructures. We have digital and computing. I mentioned these things, cyber technology and energy tech, i.e. all what has to do with the capability to balance and to have algorithms to balance the system. We have developed 4, let me say, accelerators that are private accelerators. You know, one in the, let me say, largest cities in Italy. And these are the hosting facilities, you know, which we have, you know, the development of projects that are related to the Terna system. We can conclude, you know, this introduction to the next slide, please. Well, what we are looking for, very simple. We are looking for outstanding counterparts, you know, that can be a part of our program of innovation, you know, on the technologies that I mentioned, and that can be part of, you know, our set of projects that are, let me say, have been identified in the development plan that was conceived, you know, with the latest strategic plan that was presented to the markets in March. So that's all. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Piero, and great to have you on board, by the way. This concludes the presentation of the corporate partners. Now, just to finish the sets of presentation, we're going to run real quick on the other side of the ecosystem. So we're going to ask Marwan, the head of scouting and advisory from our Barcelona office, to give a glimpse of the 70 plus startups that have been selected to have conversations with the corporates that we just presented. So Marwan, I'll leave it to you.
Great, thanks, Marco, and hello to everyone. I'm Marwan Abdaloui, director of the advisory team at Bind the Bridge. I promise not to be long. I know that basically I'm standing between you and maybe your beer, if you're lucky. So yeah, as you may know, so we have some additional activities happening the upcoming days, such as the one-on-one meetings, and between the corporate partners and our scale-ups that we have been scouting the last month. Before going into giving you a short overview of the startups, I just wanted to thank the whole team that have been behind the scene and organizing or finding the startups or organizing this digital summit. So thanks again. Now about the scale-ups. So yeah, so here we just wanted to share with you a bit the maturity of the startups. You can see here in the 3 charts, basically that the main startups and scale-ups are in the Series A, B, and seed. That's why actually we call it the Scale-up Summit, even though we have some seed startups that fit actually the need of our clients and partners. And also that is basically stressed by the number of employees. As you can see, the majority of them have between 11 to 50 employees. In terms of verticals, you can see that basically we spread into the mobility, travel tech, construction industry 4.0, energy and sustainability verticals, and it's well balanced. Maybe just wanted to stress the 2 newcomers that are healthcare, not a surprise, taking into account the conjuncture, the actual conjuncture and the COVID crisis, but also the agriculture technology, so what we call agri-tech. So now I will go through one vertical. I won't describe all of the startups, but just give you some overview within each vertical. So if you can go to the next slide, Carmine, thank you. So in the mobility verticals, what we can see is that our scale-ups basically are spread through the fleet management, such as Autofleet. We have many driver monitoring startups as well, such as Adam Cogtech, but also mobility as a service and electric vehicle companies, more basically in the how to charge the vehicles, etc. So these three sub-verticals are still we can see as a sub-trend, if we can say. Can we go to the next slide, please? In the next, in the travel tech, Carmina, yeah, thanks. In the travel tech vertical, here very interesting. So we can see that actually, and I like to call it the sleeping as a service almost. So mainly for travelers, but also I think that's Pop and Rest is also working to provide some sleeping services to the workers so that they can be more efficient and to avoid any accidents. We can go to the next slide, Carmina. In the construction space, basically it's all about digitization, but more specifically, it's about providing some smart building services, also smart designing when it comes to designing the spaces, and also digitization the sites, and to enable the automation of those sites. And SiteAware is a good example of that. Now let's see the healthcare vertical. So in the next slide, thanks, Carmine. So here, 3 scale-ups. What we can see is that the communication platform is very present here, but also H4D is enabling the self-remote diagnosis. Again, not a surprise coming back to the actual situation with the COVID crisis. In the next slide, please, with the sustainability. And here what I wanted to mention is that basically the next 3 verticals are very close. But what we can tell is that sustainability is all about being more efficient, specifically in the water and the use of water, but also in the use of the energy. And here we have also some scale-ups very focused on waste management. In the energy, so in the next slide, we have many scale-ups focused on renewable energy, classic, let's say. But also in the renewable, we can also add the hydrogen. And just to echo what Marco said about TNH and Nikola, just Nikola, a hydrogen company startup that went IPO, where CNH actually invested a few months ago. So the hydrogen is coming back into the space. But we have also, I'm not sure about the pronunciation here, but it's energy storage, so focus on hydrogen. But also, last but not least, the battery and the storage with Scaleup. In the oil and gas vertical, we have basically a lot of scale-ups focusing on smart infrastructure. So again, being more efficient. And here I can just quote briefly Dashboard Limited, who is really focusing on that. Almost there, Industry 4.0, still all about predictive analytics and maintenance. A lot about also smart infrastructure, such as oil and gas. But also, and that's kind of new, but having some robotic management startups with unmanned life. And yeah, we can go to the last one, agritech, the newcomer. So here what we can tell is that really AI is all over, has taken this space. And we can see that, for example, AgroScout, which basically provide an AI visual recognition to basically understand the state of the crop using some GPS images. Basically, it's just one example here. We have also, and just to finish here, obviously a lot of drone company that really can be used to, again, be very efficient on how to monitor the crops. That's about it about the startups. I hope I gave you a short overview, but interesting overview about the Scaleups. Very exciting to have the one-on-one meetings on Thursday and Friday, and for some of them also on Monday. And that's about it. Marco?
Thank you, Marwan. That was record-breaking. 70 startups presented in 5 minutes. We want to stay within the 2 hours that were allocated for these presentations. I just wanted to, as I said, thank you all the speakers that participated today. Also to conclude what Marwan just said, the next few days will be dedicated to one-on-one meetings. If companies out there, corporates out there want to have an interaction with some of the startups that were highlighted, we're more than happy to help. So feel free to reach out. If not, next summit will happen in San Francisco. We don't know whether it's digital or physical, but that will happen. And it will be at the end of September and the first few days of October. So with that, right on time, we conclude the live sessions. And thank you very much for your participation, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.